They always said I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And yet, when I learned to hold everything in, to become a perfect listener, a silent fixer, a shadow behind their spotlight, they still said I wasn't enough. That day, I wore blue. A deep navy that reminded me of the ocean after a storm, still, but holding 1,000 unspoken currents beneath. My hair was pinned back with the same gold clip my mother had given me when I turned 16, the one she said made me look respectable at least. I hadn't seen them in 3 years. Not since the last family gathering where I'd been instructed to serve wine and smile, because networking matters more than family feelings. They didn't know I was coming. Of course, they hadn't invited me. My name was never included on those pristine, cream-colored envelopes edged with gold filigree that my father insisted be hand-delivered. But I came anyway. Not to crash their party. No, I came to honor a promise. I'd spent 2 months designing the gift. It wasn't store-bought. It wasn't flashy. It was a handcrafted, gilded memory box lined with velvet, filled with letters from those who remembered what my family tried to forget. Letters from people my father once fired, whom I helped find new work. From clients who told me I'd changed their lives, even when the business claimed the credit. From the custodial staff at our old office building who still called me the only one who ever asked how our day was going. And yet, when I reached the door, gift in hand, my father didn't even blink. He stared at me like a stranger, his jaw sharp with years of power that never had to apologize. "You're not on the list. Go away," he said. As if I were a delivery girl. As if I hadn't once helped save the company from collapse with a quiet midnight audit. As if he hadn't once drunkenly told me, "You're the smartest of all of them, but too soft to lead." I smiled. I had no rebuttal. No scene to make. I gently placed the box at the edge of the doorway, knowing full well it would either be tossed aside or locked in a drawer and forgotten. And I turned. My heels clicking softly against the marble, the same sound that used to echo in our family's grand hallway when I'd sneak downstairs to grab an extra cookie, only to be scolded for spoiling my appetite. But then, a voice. A deep, calm, resolute voice. "That's my boss," the man said. Silence swept the room like a wave crashing over brittle porcelain. Dozens of heads turned. My father's face lost its color. He stood near the back, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored suit that I'd helped design for his promotion celebration 6 months ago. Malcolm Ellis, CEO of Ellison Strategies. My employee. My protege. My loyal friend. "She owns Ellison," he continued. "You wouldn't know that because she never puts her name first. But she built the company from the ground up. Every major deal we've closed? She approved it. Every life we've changed? That's her vision. You may not see her, but we do." I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. The weight of truth had already begun its quiet, unshakable descent. As I stepped out into the night, the wind picked up, tugging gently at my coat. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a storm warning. It felt like a reckoning that I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because the hurt had long since turned into something else. Something denser. Like a stone you carry in your coat pocket, not sharp enough to cut, not heavy enough to stop your stride, but always there. As I walked down the hotel's grand front steps, I could feel eyes pressing against the back of my neck. Not the pitying ones, I'd had enough of those to last a lifetime, but the curious ones. The "how did we not know" stares. The "what else has she been hiding" glances. That's the thing about building in silence. When you finally speak, your voice feels like thunder. I hailed a car, my hand steady, my spine straighter than it had been in years. Malcolm's words rang in my ears, not because they were dramatic, but because they were so simple. "That's my boss. Not friend. Not old classmate. Boss." It was a title I never claimed out loud in family circles because I knew what came next: accusations of arrogance, lectures about humility. "You've always been too sensitive to criticism," they'd say, after reducing my work to a hobby. Back at my apartment, the quiet wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. My place wasn't big, not by my net worth, but it was mine. Every plant, every painting, every perfectly placed mug in my open shelving, chosen by me. This space breathed with the freedom I carved out for myself, one risk at a time. I poured myself a glass of red wine, my grandmother's favorite, the one we used to share before she passed, before the family twisted her legacy into something exclusive. She would have called tonight the first real Parker party worth attending. She would have cackled in that raspy way of hers and whispered, "Let the wolves know you bite too." My phone buzzed. A flood of messages. "Vanessa? What the hell was that?" "Marcus, we should talk." "Mother, you're being dramatic." "Call me." "Alexander, damn. Didn't know you owned Ellison." And then, a message from Malcolm. "Malcolm, you okay?" I stared at it for a while, the simplicity of it. The way it held space for my feelings without demanding them. I typed back, lighter than I've felt in years. Because it was true. My absence had always been their expectation. My silence had always been their comfort. Tonight, I gave them neither. Tonight, I walked in uninvited and left on my own terms. The gift box, I suspected, would haunt them more than my presence. Not because of what was inside, but because it was a reminder. That I remember. That I still care. And that my care no longer comes with a cost. It's funny how they dismissed me for years, only to realize too late that I had the power to rewrite the narrative. That their reunion, their curated image of perfection, now bore the invisible signature of the woman they deemed irrelevant. They say silence is golden. But sometimes, silence is a ledger. And tonight, the debt came due. The next morning began like any other, sunlight creeping through my linen curtains, the soft hum of the city stirring outside my window. But something was different. I could feel it in the air, like static before a lightning strike. I didn't rush to check my phone. I made coffee the way I always do, French press, medium roast, a splash of oat milk. Rituals matter when the world wants to unmake you. They ground you in the truth of your own life. By the time I settled into my favorite chair, the messages had multiplied. I scrolled past the expected mix, backhanded concern from relatives, veiled threats from cousins, a few genuine apologies buried beneath layers of disbelief. But what struck me most were the unfamiliar names. Sandra L. I was at the event last night. I used to work for your father. I just wanted to say, thank you. Tina H. We've never met, but I watched everything from across the room. That was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. Julia M. You probably don't remember me. You paid for my internship stipend when your dad cut the department's budget. I've always wondered if you knew how much that meant to me. Dozens of messages. Stories from people I hadn't thought about in years. Each one a reminder that while I had been dismissed in my family's echo chamber, my voice had still traveled. Not loud, not grand, but steady. Real. The news traveled faster than I expected. Malcolm called mid-afternoon. You went viral, he said, his voice part amusement, part awe. Someone caught the whole thing on video. It's everywhere. My stomach tightened. What do you mean by everywhere? Everywhere. Twitter, LinkedIn, even TikTok. People are calling it the silent storm moment. You standing there, smiling, walking away, and then me calling you out. It's cinematic, apparently. I let out a low laugh. Well, I always did have a flair for drama. No, Malcolm said gently. You have a gift for timing. And truth. People are starving for both. I hung up and stared at the wall, the soft golden light playing along the framed photos of places I'd visited, not people I needed to impress. Iceland. Kyoto. The coast of Amalfi. I'd collected moments, not trophies. And suddenly, that felt like power. It wasn't just about the family anymore. It was about every woman who had ever been told to shrink. Every daughter who'd been asked to disappear so others could shine. Every sister dismissed, every friend forgotten, every worker who quietly saved the day only to watch someone else get the credit. They didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The Parker family may have built its reputation on control, on curated stories and careful illusions. But I had just torn a seam in the fabric, and the light that poured through was blinding. 3 days later, I received a formal letter in the mail. Not a call, not a text, a letter. The envelope was thick, engraved with the Parker family crest, 2 lions flanking a sword. Always fighting, always protecting what was never under threat. I slid it open with the brass opener Malcolm had gifted me last Christmas, engraved simply, cut clean. Inside, I found the expected performance. A typed page, carefully worded, stamped with the signatures of the reunion committee, led, of course, by Aunt Marilyn. The same woman who once told me at 13 that art is for girls who marry well, not for Parkers who mean to matter. It read, Olivia, we regret the incident at the family reunion and the disruption it caused to what was otherwise a successful and meaningful event. In future, we ask that all guests adhere to the invitation protocol for the sake of maintaining harmony and preserving the sanctity of these cherished traditions. Warmly, the Parker Family Reunion Committee. Sanctity. Harmony. The words clinked like ice in a glass of too sweet champagne, hollow and artificial. They wanted to reassert control, pretend nothing had changed, that I had been a ripple, not a tide. But here's the thing about tides, they always return. I placed the letter in a drawer beside others like it. Polite rejections, backhanded invitations, notices that reminded me my place in the family had never been at the table, only near enough to serve it. That night, I sat with Malcolm and 2 other colleagues, Ava, my head of communications, and Jonah, who had once been a sous chef but now ran our internal events team. I want to host something, I told them. Not a party, a gathering. For people like us. Like survivors? Ava asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled. Not just survivors. Builders. Fixers. Those who kept their families together, their businesses afloat, their souls intact, while being told to stay quiet. Jonah leaned forward. You want a reunion of the overlooked. Exactly. We called it the unlisted. Within days, Ava had designed a beautiful invitation, matte black cardstock, embossed in gold, with no return address. Just 1 line in elegant script. You may not be on their list, but you're on ours. We sent them out anonymously to former employees, estranged family members, classmates forgotten by legacy systems, women whose resumes were dismissed, but whose ideas changed industries. I booked the Paragon. Not just any floor. The rooftop suite. The one with a view that made people weep without knowing why. The one with my name hidden in the fine print of the foundation grant plaque. Let the Parkers keep their committee. I was building a council. And this time, no one would be turned away at the door. The night of the unlisted gathering arrived with the kind of quiet electricity that wraps around you like a secret waiting to be told. The city lights shimmered below, casting golden reflections across the rooftop glass of the Paragon, the hotel I had built from the ground up, one rejected blueprint, one sleepless night, one improbable investor at a time. I stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, watching the first guests arrive. They came in pairs, in silence, in hesitation. There was no red carpet, no valet preening for tips. Just warm lighting, soft jazz in the background, and my name nowhere to be found on the signage. Still, they knew who had summoned them. The first to approach me was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pinned into a chignon and eyes that had known too many storms. Her voice trembled slightly. You won't remember me, she began. But I used to work for your family. I was the assistant your father fired when he said my energy didn't match the firm's direction. You were 13. You brought me coffee the day I packed up. And you told me you shouldn't be punished for telling the truth. She paused. That was the first time anyone ever said that to me. I never forgot. I reached for her hand. Neither did I. More arrived. A former adjunct professor who'd lost tenure over a departmental reshuffle that protected predators and punished reformers. A chef who had once trained under my cousin but had been denied credit for a recipe that became the restaurant's signature. A nurse who had cared for my grandmother during her final days and had been silenced when she reported mistreatment. Each story was a thread in a tapestry of resilience. A symphony of lives forced into background noise who now stood, center stage, without apology. Jonah had outdone himself. The menu was understated brilliance. Ava had filled the space with candles and conversation, not hashtags or hashtags. We weren't performing for the internet. We were remembering ourselves. And in the center of it all, an empty chair. Symbolic, yes. But more than that, it was an invitation to the self each of us had abandoned at some point in pursuit of approval that never came. Later that evening, Malcolm pulled me aside, a glass of wine in his hand, his smile soft. "You see it, don't you?" he said. "See what?" "The shift. You didn't just make space. You created gravity." His words stayed with me even as I lay in bed hours later, the city quieting around me. I thought of my father's voice, so cold that night, "You're not on the list." And I smiled again because now I understood. I was never meant to be on their list. I was meant to write my own. I woke the next morning to the slow warmth of dawn creeping through my windows and a buzzing phone. 138 unread messages. I scrolled through them like a woman walking through a haunted house, knowing each door held a ghost from her past. But what struck me most wasn't the number. It was who had sent the first one. "Dad, we need to talk." 3 simple words. No punctuation. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. It was the same voice he had used when I was 12 and got top marks in creative writing instead of math. Not anger, but disappointment disguised as neutrality. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence is its own kind of answer. And sometimes, the only one that's heard. Instead, I turned to something that had become more sacred to me than my phone or my family's opinion. My journal. The one I'd kept since I was 9. The one I used to hide under my mattress like contraband in a house where only logic was praised. I flipped to a blank page and wrote at the top, "The list that matters." I began with names. Not of the people who had hurt me, but the ones who had held me. Mrs. Callahan, my 3rd grade teacher, who let me design the classroom reading nook instead of punishing me for daydreaming. Raoul, the janitor at my first job, who taught me that dignity had nothing to do with titles and everything to do with how you treat others when no one is watching. My first mentor, Janice, who once told me, "You don't have to become what they expect to prove them wrong. You just have to become more of yourself." I kept writing. Memories. Achievements. Moments of laughter, of resilience, of risk. A love letter to every version of me who had been ignored, sidelined, underestimated, and kept going anyway. By the time I looked up, the sun had fully risen. I didn't feel victorious. I felt rooted. The kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from finally walking away from a rigged game and building a new one. That afternoon, Malcolm forwarded me a news link. The headline read, "Silent Storm, the woman behind the viral family showdown speaks without saying a word." I didn't click it. I didn't need to. My story wasn't theirs to package or profit from. It belonged to every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. It belonged to us. The next envelope that arrived wasn't white or gold. It was black, matte, smooth, and without a return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick as cardstock, folded with precision. At the top, in my mother's handwriting, the kind that used to label my lunchboxes and scold my birthday invitations, were 3 words. I was wrong. My breath caught. Not because of the admission itself, I'd long given up expecting one, but because of what wasn't said. There was no preamble, no justification, no story to reshape the past into something more comfortable for her. Just the stark weight of those 3 words. I ran my fingers across the page, half expecting the ink to smudge under my touch. It didn't. The rest of the letter was short. A single paragraph. "You don't have to reply." I wouldn't, if I were you. But I saw you. For the first time, I think I really saw you. And you were beautiful. Not like I expected. Not like anyone prepared me for. But undeniably, unavoidably beautiful. No signature. No apology for the years of backhanded praise or strategic silence. But for the first time, it didn't feel hollow. It felt human. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed the letter beside the others, but in a different drawer. Not the one labeled unanswered. This one I labeled wounds acknowledged. Because sometimes, even a whispered truth can begin to close a scar that no scream ever could. Later that night, I went to the rooftop garden of the Paragon. It was quiet, lit only by lanterns and the city's glow. I sat beneath the pergola of wisteria, the blooms just beginning to open despite the season. Malcolm joined me, 2 cups of chamomile tea in hand. "Word is your father's furious," he said softly, handing me a mug. I smiled, a slow curl of lips that didn't reach my eyes. "He'll survive. Men like him always do. And your mother?" "She sent a letter." I sipped. "It's complicated. Aren't they all?" For a while, we just sat there. No strategy. No plans. Just the sound of the wind threading through vines and the distant hum of life below. Then Malcolm said, "You know they'll try to reclaim you. Rewrite this into something palatable. The daughter who forgave. The black sheep who came home." "I know. Are you ready for that?" I looked out over the skyline, remembering the girl who used to press her face against the glass of her bedroom window, dreaming of escape. And the woman who now owned the view she once begged to be part of. "I'm not going back," I said. "Not even if they build a new door. Because this time I know who I am when no one's watching." He nodded. "Then let them keep their lists. We have our own." And we sat, 2 silhouettes in the night, surrounded by wisteria and truth. They began arriving, one by one. Not to the hotel or to my doorstep, but to my inbox, to my voicemail, to the quiet corners of digital spaces they once mocked or dismissed. The Parkers. First came Vanessa, always the polished diplomat of the family. Her message was carefully worded, no doubt reviewed with the same scrutiny she applied to court briefs. "I'm not sure what to say, Olivia. I watched the video. I didn't know." "That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I hope we can talk." I didn't respond. Not out of malice, but because I was still deciding whether talking to her would be healing or just reopening a wound that had finally begun to close. Then Marcus. Ever the protector, the surgeon who spent his life saving others while carefully avoiding emotional incisions. "Oh, I owe you more than I can fit in a text. I was proud of you." I should have said it sooner. Short. Sincere, perhaps. But too late. A bandage after the bleeding stopped. The most surprising message came from Alexander. We hadn't spoken in years, not since he accused me of embarrassing the family by turning down a consulting offer from one of his Wall Street clients. His voice was uncertain. Not the sharp, assured tone I remembered. Just a man who'd seen something that shook the foundation he thought was immovable. "I used to think power meant money and influence. But watching you, how people listen when you walk into a room, how you built something without trading your soul, made me realize I was wrong. You have what I've been chasing. And I don't know if I envy you or admire you. Maybe both." And still I said nothing. Not because I hadn't healed, but because healing doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means respecting the distance you fought so hard to earn. I spent the rest of the day walking through the Paragon's garden suite. Each tree and stone had been placed with intention. My intention. I remembered fighting for the wisteria vines, despite the architect insisting they were impractical for urban landscaping. They'd bloomed anyway. A guest passed by, a woman in her 50s who had attended the unlisted. She paused when she saw me. "You're her," she said softly. "The woman who left the gift." I nodded. She smiled. "Thank you for reminding me that walking away can be the most powerful thing a woman ever does." I smiled back, heartwarm. We don't always need to knock down the door. Sometimes we build a better house next door. She laughed gently. or a castle. And as she walked away, I realized this wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about inheritance. Not the kind measured in bank accounts or family names, but the kind we give ourselves. Dignity, clarity, peace. And I was finally rich. The headlines faded in time, as all things do. The viral moment became yesterday's story, overtaken by new spectacles and scandals. But for me, life didn't go back to normal because I hadn't returned to anything. I had stepped forward, and the path ahead was mine alone to define. I no longer checked to see if my family had posted anything about me, mentioned me, or erased me again. I no longer needed to know, because I'd stopped performing for an audience that had never truly clapped for me. Instead, I focused on the work. Not the company, though Ellison continued to thrive, but the quieter work, tending to my own garden. Both literal and metaphorical. I joined a local mentorship program, helping young women navigate the tangled terrain of business, creativity, and family expectations. I gave talks not to impress, but to tell the truth. To stand as proof that a woman's power doesn't come from being approved, but from being undeterred. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not from my family, not from the media, but from someone unexpected. It was from the hotel receptionist at the Paragon. She had only recently discovered who I was. "You probably don't remember me," she wrote. "But I remember you. You came down to the front desk every morning during our training week and brought coffee to all of us. I thought you were just another executive assistant. You listened. You asked our names. When I made a mistake with a booking, you covered for me. No lecture. Just grace. I want you to know that after watching what you did at the reunion, I asked for a transfer to front office management. I believed maybe I could be more, too." That letter moved me more than all the Parker apologies combined. Because she saw me when I wasn't being dramatic. When I wasn't being defiant. She saw me in the in-between moments, the ones women are taught not to count because they don't come with applause. But I counted them. And now I saw them everywhere. In the tired mother smiling at her child's scribbled card, in the janitor humming quietly as he polished floors that others trampled over without thanks, in the young intern afraid to speak up but staying late to make sure everything was perfect. They were all writing their own lists. They were all building legacies no spotlight could contain. That night, I added a new line to mine. To be seen, not just noticed. To be felt, not just praised. To be real even when the world prefers the illusion. And then I closed the journal, turned out the lights, and let myself rest. Not because I was tired of fighting, but because I no longer had to point. 2 months later, I received an invitation. Handwritten, cream-colored envelope. The kind my family still clung to, as if antiquated elegance could disguise outdated beliefs. Inside, a card with embossed letters read, "The Parker Family Legacy Gala, celebrating our pillars of excellence." Location, the Fairmont. Date, 2 Saturdays from now. Dress code, formal. At the bottom, scrawled in my father's tight cursive, "We'd like you to attend. Your presence would mean something." No apology. No explanation. Just an extension of the same old hand, flat, polished, but never truly open. I stared at the card for a long while. There was a time I would have wept at such a gesture. A time when I would have analyzed every word, called Malcolm, paced my apartment, weighed my worth against their willingness to include me. But that time was gone. Now, I measured invitations not by their glamour or lineage, but by their gravity. Did the space they offered allow me to breathe? To speak? To be? Still, I felt a tug. Not a desire to return, but a need to finish something. Closure isn't always neat. Sometimes, it arrives in the form of a cracked door. Not to be walked through, but to remind you why you left. I replied with a single line. "I'll attend. But this time, I'll choose where I sit." When the night arrived, I dressed in midnight blue, again. Not to echo the moment they rejected me, but to reclaim it. The same gold hairpin adorned my twist, not as armor, but as lineage. Mine. As I stepped into the Fairmont, heads turned. But not in the way they once did. Not with confusion or curiosity. With recognition. They knew. My father met me at the entrance, stiff in his tuxedo, unsure how to greet me. He opened his mouth, but I walked past him. Not out of disrespect, but out of memory. He had already spoken loudest the night he denied me the list. I didn't need another script. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Every table was named after a Parker pillar: law, medicine, finance, legacy. And then I saw it. A table off to the side. Smaller. Unnamed. Just one card sat atop it: Olivia. It wasn't placement. It was a message. This is your place. Still apart. I smiled. Then I walked to the center of the room, to the podium left open for speeches, and said calmly to the nearest staff member, "May I?" He nodded. The microphone clicked on. Conversations hushed. Faces turned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "My name is Olivia Parker," I began. "And I am no longer here to ask for a seat. I am here to offer you a view of what it looks like when someone stops waiting for permission." The silence after I spoke was its own kind of echo, one that doesn't bounce back, but seeps inward, demanding reflection. I didn't wait for applause. Instead, I stepped down from the podium and took a seat, not at the isolated table they'd reserved for me, but at the head table, beside the chair labeled Legacy. I removed the card. Vanessa's eyes widened. Marcus looked down. Alexander chuckled, but not unkindly. My father remained still, his jaw set, as if clenching silence was the only power he had left. And then my mother stood. She didn't say much. Just reached out, picked up the card that bore my name from the corner table, and placed it beside mine. "I think we got this wrong," she said. Then sat again, hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even real remorse. But it was something. A fracture in the illusion. A seam undone. Later that evening, a woman in her 60s approached me quietly. She introduced herself as Margot, one of my grandfather's former assistants. "I watched you tonight," she said, voice hushed with emotion. "Your grandfather would have been proud. He used to say, 'One day Olivia will show them what quiet strength looks like.'" I nearly lost my breath. "I didn't think he noticed," I whispered. Margot smiled. "He noticed everything. But in this family, noticing you and naming you were two different things. He chose silence, too often. We all did. But tonight, you named yourself." As she walked away, I thought of all the times I had doubted my own memory, wondered if I had imagined the warmth behind my grandfather's rare smiles. If his nods were approval or just politeness. But now I knew. And that knowledge didn't erase the hurt, but it lit a candle in it. Back at home, I opened the list again. The list that matters. I added a new line. "Sometimes the room won't hold you because it was never built for you. That doesn't mean you weren't meant to lead." A week after the gala, the official Parker family newsletter arrived. Yes, they still sent one. A quarterly relic, mailed out like clockwork to alumni, relatives, and anyone bearing the name, whether they asked for it or not. This edition featured photos from the gala, carefully curated to show unity. There was a paragraph about the evening's unprecedented warmth and a sentence tucked between updates about Marcus's latest medical article and Alexander's investment keynote. We were especially pleased to welcome Olivia Parker, whose recent contributions in hospitality innovation are a point of pride for the family. No mention of Ellison. No mention of my ownership of the Paragon. Certainly no mention of the moment that sparked 1,000 retweets and shook the marble under their feet. Just contributions. Vague. Safe. Sanitized. And yet, I didn't burn the page. I didn't circle the text in red or throw it in a drawer marked out. I folded it neatly and placed it under the letter my mother had written. Because even diluted recognition was proof of their discomfort. And discomfort meant they were finally seeing the crux. 2 days later, I returned to the rooftop of the Paragon. Not for a party, not for a statement, but for a small, private ceremony. We'd installed a new plaque just beneath the central archway of the garden where the unlisted first met. It read, "For those never called forward, but who led anyway." Malcolm was there, of course. So was Ava. Jonah brought a single white lily and placed it at the base. A small crowd had gathered, mentors, ments, friends who had once whispered their dreams in rooms too loud to hear them. As I stepped forward to unveil the plaque, I felt something I hadn't known how to name before. It wasn't pride. It was closure. Not the cinematic kind with orchestras and reconciliations, but the quiet kind, the sort that feels like pulling a door gently shut after years of standing in a draft. I spoke briefly. Legacy isn't what others say about you after you're gone. It's what you build when no one thinks you're capable. It's what you leave behind in the hands of those you once had to become. There were tears. Some mine, some theirs. But there was also laughter. The warm, grounded kind. The kind that comes from surviving, from being seen, from standing not on stage, but beside others who carry similar scars. Later that evening, alone in my suite, I ran a finger along the spine of my journal and wrote. They gave me a scar. I made it a seal. It was strange what I started noticing once I stopped trying to be noticed. Without the noise of striving for acknowledgement, I began hearing smaller sounds, real laughter, my own breath in the morning silence, the crisp turn of pages in the books I used to stack but never open. There was space in my life now. Room where duty used to live. It was tender. And in that quiet, I waited, not because I still needed them, but because part of me was curious. Would my father ever call? Not for show. Not for some family announcement. Not to subtly remind me of some sacrifice he made that I should be grateful for. Just a call. A real one. It never came. Instead, I heard from a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade. Eva. A woman I remembered as being perpetually perched in a corner at family functions, as if hoping no one would ask her about her life. Her message was simple. You don't know me, not really. But I watched what you did. And, because of you, I finally walked away. I moved. I started the bakery I dreamed of when we were kids. I'm happy for the first time in years. I stared at her message, thinking about all the women we overlook within our own families. The ones who seem fine. Who fade into the walls. Who smile on cue but never quite sparkle. Eva had noticed me, even in my silence. And now she had found her voice too. I replied, bake something beautiful, and then eat the first piece yourself. That afternoon, I sat by the window, sipping tea, wrapped in a throw my grandmother had knitted before the arthritis, took her hands. The sky was that soft kind of gray that makes the world feel gentle. And I wrote, you don't always get the apology. Sometimes, you get something better. Peace without permission. I closed the journal, heart full. The kind of full that doesn't require anyone else to understand it. The phone stayed silent. But I did not feel unhurt. I made reservations at the Paragon. My hotel. My name not in neon, not on plaques, but on every detail of the experience. The lighting, the linen, the hush of respect that fell over staff and guests alike. But this time, I wasn't hosting. I wanted a table for one. Window seat. Just myself, my journal, and the chef's tasting menu. The hostess smiled as she seated me. Lovely to have you dining with us tonight, Ms. Parker. Not Mississippi. Not Olivia. Miss Parker. A recognition of both identity and independence. The server brought a glass of my favorite red without asking. The perks of curating a space so thoroughly that it recognizes your essence before you even speak. Around me, conversations danced. A couple celebrating an anniversary. A trio of women clinking glasses over new promotions. A solitary man nervously checking his reflection in a spoon. But at my table, there was no tension. No performance. Just breath. Bite. Reflection. With each course came memory. The rosemary bread reminded me of the small herb garden I kept in my first studio apartment, the one I nurtured even when everything else felt like it was wilting. The citrus-glazed halibut took me back to a vacation I once splurged on alone, Thailand, where no one knew my name or my story, and I was free to simply exist. And the dessert, a lavender panna cotta, reminded me of the silence after the unlisted gathering, when we all just sat in shared stillness, full not just with food, but with recognition. As the evening wound down, the maitre d' approached. He didn't bring a bill. Instead, he set down a small envelope. Inside, a note. You gave me my first chance. No resume. Just trust. I now manage your flagship restaurant. This is my thank you. Leon. I smiled. It was the smallest acknowledgement. And yet it meant everything. Because it reminded me of something simple. Power doesn't always look like applause or control. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet dinner alone, where every bite is a reminder that you earned this life, not through acceptance, but through defiance of limits that were never yours to begin with. Months had passed. Seasons had shifted. The city shed its summer skin and pulled on autumn's coat of amber and rust. And still, I felt new. One evening, while walking past an old university building downtown, the one where my father had once given a guest lecture on the discipline of excellence, I noticed a construction site. A new wing. A new name being carved into the stone facade. I paused. The Richard S. Parker Center for Professional Integrity. The irony nearly made me laugh. Integrity. From a man who once redirected employee pensions to cover a failing expansion. From someone who had told me, point blank, that reputation mattered more than rightness. I stepped closer, watching the chisel dance across the granite. And then, as if summoned by memory, I saw her. The woman who had once taught the business ethics seminar I audited years ago, back when I still believed degrees would legitimize my worth. Professor Elaine Morris. She looked up from a clipboard, eyes landing on me with a flicker of recognition. Olivia Parker, she said, her voice a mix of surprise and something warmer. I heard your name a few months ago. Loudly. I smiled. I tend to make quiet things loud. She chuckled, then turned back to the stone. Funny, isn't it? Naming buildings after legacies that were built on sand. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She looked back at me. There's talk of a new lecture series. On real integrity. Not legacy. I'd like you to speak. Me. At the same university that once tried to groom me into a facsimile of a Parker man. Me, offering truth in a place that had always prized presentation. I didn't hesitate. I'll do it, I said. But I won't talk about resilience or redemption. Professor Morris raised an eyebrow. What will you talk about? About leaving. And about how the first time I said no, no one applauded, but everything changed. She nodded. Slowly. Good. They need to hear that. That night, I wrote. Let them name the buildings. I'm building the maps. Because I no longer needed my name on a wall to know where I belonged. The first time someone from the Parker family showed up at the Paragon unannounced, it was a Tuesday. It was Vanessa. She stood in the lobby, wrapped in a tailored trench coat, her heels echoing softly on the marble I'd chosen years ago. There was no press. No entourage. Just her. And a small envelope in her hand. I know you're busy, she said when I appeared, summoned by a confused concierge who recognized a family resemblance. But I need 5 minutes. And not as your sister. As someone who finally understands what it costs to be overlooked. I almost sent her away. Not out of bitterness, but because my peace had become so sacred. Letting in a ghost felt like inviting a storm into still water. But 5 minutes? 5 minutes I could give. We sat in the winter garden room, quiet except for the sound of the fountain. She didn't compliment the decor. She didn't ask how I'd been. She handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of 3 letters, one to our father's professional board, one to a journalist I recognized, and one to a former employee she had wronged. I'm cleaning house, she said. And I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I've started. I looked at her. Really looked. The same eyes, now shaded by years of climbing ladders that led to rooms with no windows. You don't owe me this, I said. I know, she replied. But I owe me, and this is the only place that ever felt honest enough to start. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as a sister, not as a symbol of everything I wasn't, but as a woman fighting her way toward truth. We didn't hug. We didn't make plans. She left as quietly as she came. But I knew something had changed. Later, I added a new line to my journal. When the door you once knocked on becomes the one they knock on, don't answer out of pity. Open it if, and only if, peace allows. And mine did. It had been years since we took an official Parker family portrait. The last one I remembered was stiff, taken in a rented ballroom, all of us arranged like chess pieces in shades of navy and cream. That day, I'd been instructed to wear a dress my mother sent, 2 sizes too large and 3 decades out of style. You're in the back row anyway, she'd said. This time, I wasn't invited. Not directly. But I received a forwarded email from a distant cousin, the kind who kept one foot in both worlds and still sent me New Year's cards even after the schism. The email read, "Family portrait reshoot, requested by Richard Parker. Full attendance encouraged. New location, the Paragon." That last line stopped me cold. They had booked my hotel. Again. Not out of ignorance, this time. Not because they didn't know I owned it, but because they could no longer pretend I didn't. They were, for once, coming into my space. My domain. I debated attending. Not because I wanted to be in the photo, but because I wanted to see what it looked like to finally witness the performance from the other side of the lens. The day arrived. The ballroom was filled with the usual tension dressed up in silk and polished shoes. My father stood near the front, directing with a tight-lipped smile. My mother adjusted everyone's collars. Marcus talked shop with an uncle. Alexander flirted with the photographer's assistant. Vanessa hovered, uncertain. I walked in, not to be included, but to observe. The photographer froze when he saw me. My father didn't. He approached, slow, deliberate. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "You didn't ask me to." He nodded, as if that small truth had finally found a place to land. "Do you want to be in it?" he asked. I studied him, the man who once said I didn't belong on the list, who had shaped so much of what I fought to unlearn. "No," I said. "I already have my picture. It's called The Unlisted, and it's full of people who saw me before the headlines." He didn't argue, just looked away. I turned, walked out of the frame, and left them to their performance. And that night, I wrote, "Not every family portrait needs your face in it. Some are best observed to remind you of the space you had to outgrow." In the years that followed, my name appeared in places the Parkers had never dared imagine. Not just magazines or business panels, but whispered with reverence in circles of women who had lived in the shadows of brighter brothers and louder mothers. I received invitations to tell my story at universities, at women's leadership summits, at startup incubators, not because I had triumphed, but because I had refused to disappear. But the greatest honor came not from a stage or a plaque. It came from a letter written in crooked, careful handwriting. From a girl named Naomi, age 14. "I watched your video in my civics class," she wrote. "We were learning about power. Everyone talked about presidents and companies. But I think what you did was real power. My brother always gets credit. My parents say I talk too much, but now I write. And I want to build something too. Maybe not a hotel. Maybe just a room. But one where I matter." I cried when I read it, not because it hurt, but because it healed. That letter sat on my nightstand for months, a reminder of the small echoes we leave behind when we stop chasing loud victories. The Parkers still gathered. They still published their newsletters, awarded scholarships in my father's name, and reshaped family history to taste. I no longer followed. I no longer wondered. Because what I had built wasn't a name. It was a place. The Paragon had expanded. 3 new properties across the country, all with hidden plaques in their gardens. Each engraved with the same line. "For the ones who stayed kind while being dismissed. You were never invisible. Only underestimated." I had kept the gold hairpin. I had kept the blue dress, but I had let go of the shame, the hunger, the hope that they would ever say what I needed to hear. And instead, I listened to women like Naomi, because her voice was the future. And mine? Mine had become the bridge. It was the anniversary of the gala, the one where I took the mic not to reclaim the family name, but to name myself. I hadn't planned anything. No speeches. No events. Just a quiet day. And then, a message arrived. Not a letter this time. A voicemail. From my father. Olivia, he said, his voice thinner than I remembered. I'm at the Paragon. They say you're not here. That you're at the new location. But I needed to. I'm not good at this. I never have been. A pause. A sigh. I watched the footage again. Not the public one. The security one. I saw your face when I turned you away. And I saw the man stand up for you. I've watched it a dozen times. You didn't flinch. Another silence. I used to think control was strength. That if I could direct everything, no one could leave. But you left anyway. And now I think, maybe that's what strength actually looks like. No apology. Not really. But something fractured. Something real. I didn't call back. Instead, I walked to the Paragon's original rooftop, the garden where the wisteria still bloomed. I lit a candle. Not for him. Not even for the memory of us. But for the girl who once begged to be seen. She didn't live here anymore. She lived everywhere now, in voices like Naomi's, in the women who gathered beneath my hotel arches, in the men who stepped aside to let them speak. I whispered to the flame. You didn't fail. You grew past the container they gave you. And I let the candle burn until morning. There was no grand finale. No cinematic ending with swelling music and applause. Just a morning like any other, sunlight through the curtains, the low hum of the city, a journal beside my bed, now filled with years of words that once choked in silence. I had been invited, again, to the Parker family's annual winter gathering. This time, the invitation was different. It wasn't printed on thick stock or laced with expectation. It was a simple email from Vanessa. If you ever want to come, the door's open. You don't have to wear navy. I laughed when I read it. A small laugh, but real. I didn't go. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to punish them. But because I was happy. Truly, quietly happy. At the Paragon's newest location in New Orleans, we'd just opened a library, not a flashy one, but a warm, tucked-away space filled with memoirs, biographies, and handwritten notes from guests. One wall was dedicated to letters to our former selves. I wrote mine and pinned it in the center. Dear Olivia, you did it. Not by shouting, not by begging, but by walking. You didn't lose your family. You found yourself. They didn't forget you. They just never knew you. Until you introduced yourself. And now, you're not just on the list. You wrote it. With love. The version of you who finally came home. I stepped back and let the words live there, not as proof of triumph, but as shelter for someone else still searching for hers. Because in the end, I didn't need the throne. Or the table. I had built the kingdom. And I ruled it not with fear, but with grace. A quiet crown. Worn without permission. But with pride.